Today is the 24th of April in 2024, and we are interviewing Tibor Hauerstock in New York, USA. My name is Alexandra Sabo. Thank you, Tibor. So please introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Tibor Hauerstock, and what else would you like to know?
Could you please spell us your first and last name?
Of course. My first name is Tibor, Tibor. My last name is Hauerstock.
Thank you. Was this your name at birth?
Yes, it was.
Did you have any other names, even
No.
nicknames?
Well, my nickname is Tibi. That's what my mother called me. I mean, if you want to call me also, it's fine.
Thank you.
And when I was married, my wife had trouble with Tibor, so she called me Teddy, which was also fine. So,
And Tibi is a Hungarian nickname. Can you spell it for the viewers?
Tibi.
Thank you. When were you born?
I was born in July 21st, 1934,
How old are you today?
89,
And what's the name of the town where you were born?
in Budapest, Hungary, in the Jewish hospital.
Where? Which Jewish hospital?
That was only one Jewish hospital. I think it was the 13th district. But I had problem finding it when I needed my birth certificate. But that was my birth. But again, it was, I think it was the 13th district.
What were your maternal grandparents' names?
My maternal grandparents' name was my grandfather, who died in 1916. His name was Ignaz, Ingnac. His last name is Bruszt, Brust. And my grandmother was Charlotta. I think her birth name was Blythe.
Can you spell both names?
Sarolta was her first name, and Bleih, her last name.
And what was their origin, nationality, ethnicity, and religion?
They were both Jewish, and I think my grandmother was born in Székesfehérvár. My grandfather, I don't know. I presume he was Hungarian, but I don't know.
And what languages did your grandmother speak?
My maternal grandmother speaks Hungarian.
Can you describe what she was like?
Well, she was a real homemaker. She took care of me a lot, and also my cousin, one of my cousins. And she also had a small grocery store before the war, of course, long before the war, Second World War. And I don't know what else can I say. Loved her dearly. She was a real beautiful-minded woman, a little dumpling kind, but she really took care of my mother. No, not my mother, my father and I for a long time.
What's your fondest memory of her?
My father's memory, and it's making the strudel, because what she made the strudel herself, with all kinds of fruits and poppy seeds and nuts. And I remember when we had a reasonably big table, and she'd pull uh, the the cover of the strudel, the what do you call that, the testa,
Dough.
the dough. She pulled the dough herself, and that's one. And also, she'd done a lot of saving of the fruits and for the winter, because the food wasn't exactly like it's here right now, and there's a lot of fruit was preserved, and she done the preserving. So basically, that's most of my remembrance of my maternal grandmother.
And you said she had a store. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I must have been about 5 or 6 when she had the store. That was a small grocery store. It's right next to the building where she lived. Uh, There's nothing I can tell you about it. It was just a small grocery store.
And where was this?
That was Erdei utca 8. Erdei utca 7 in Budapest. It's next to Teleki tér, nearby anyway.
Okay, what was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Ilona, Ilona. That was her first name. And her last name was at birth, Bruszt. Brust.
And her married name when she had you?
Well, it was Hauerstock, and then her second married name in New York, it was Maged, Maged.
Where was she born?
She was born in Székesfehérvár, Hungary.
When?
She was born in April 4th, 1909.
Did she have any siblings?
Yes, she did. Okay, now my grandfather, Bruce Ignatz, he had 2 wives. Her first wife was from Austria, and they were living in Székesfehérvár, and she died in 1906, the first wife, and they had 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl. They all in Székesfehérvár, and I presume in 1906, she had 4 kids. Very close after she died in 1906, she married my grandmother, Charlotta, because they had 2 girls. One was Elizabeth, well in English Elizabeth, Erzsébet, magyarul, in Hungarian, and she was born on Christmas Eve, well, Christmas Day or Eve in 1907. And then my mother was the last one. She was born in April 4th of 1909.
And then your grandfather moved to Budapest with your grandmother?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think he died in Székesfehérvár. He died in 1916. I know that because when I went back to Hungary from New York, one of my cousins from Székesfehérvár, and we went down to the cemetery in Székesfehérvár, and I saw her first wife was buried there, and he was buried there, and I don't know who else, probably some other people was buried there also in the family. But how my grandmother, my mother's mother, got to Budapest, I don't know. But the only thing I know that got there because my mother was born in Székesfehérvár, but when and how they got to Budapest, I don't know.
And do you know how your grandfather passed away?
No. Oh, he was a doctor, by the way. How he passed away, I don't know.
What type of education did your mother receive?
High school, definitely. Other than that, I don't know.
And what was her occupation?
Housewife.
What is your strongest memory of your mother?
My strongest memory of my mother, okay, now I go back a little bit why I mentioned before that I'm extremely lucky. Now I got lucky before I was born. Let me explain it, please. My father and his 3 brothers, they were born in Budapest. But his parents came from Poland. So when they were born, even though they were born in Budapest, they weren't Hungarians. They were Ukrainian or Polish or whatever. I think it was Polish at that time. Anyway, my mother, I presume they met, they fell in love and all that. And I presume, again, it's just a presumption, that my father proposed and all that. But my mother had I talked to her about it, had one request, that before I marry you, you must become Hungarians. And why is it lucky? Because, did you hear about Kamenets-Podilsky? Did you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, because in 1941, a lot of Jews who weren't Hungarians, they were deported to Kamenets-Podilsky and murdered. I don't know if we would have been there or not, but if my mother didn't make that request, we would have probably a good chance. So, and they were married in, I remember the date, I found the date was 7 days after my father's birthday on February 12th, no, 6 days, February 12th of 1933. That's on the day we were married. My father's birthday was February 6th, and he was born in 1906.
Can you give us his name?
His name is Mor, M-O-R, and Hauerstock, of course.
Okay, and his parents, your paternal grandparents.
My paternal grandparents, I don't remember. My father was Moshe ben Yosef. Okay, my grandfather's name was Joseph Hauerstock, Joseph Hauerstock, and my grandmother's name was Helen. I don't remember her last name. I mean, other than Hauerstock, or her birth name. I know you because they had called her Helen Naney. So her name was Helen, and my grandfather, he was, okay, wherever the building, Erdei utca 8, there was a broom factory on the basement, on the ground floor and the mezzanine. There was a mezzanine building. And he was the manager of that factory. And as a matter of fact, the owner was very friendly. They were very friendly with the owner and all that. And okay, my grandfather passed away in 1936. I don't know the exact date, but I know it was definitely 1936. And the only remembrance I can recall, it might be right, might not, that in his place where my grandmother and my grandfather lived, they had an ice box, about, I don't know, about 4 feet high. And I think I remember that he put me up there to talk to me or whatever. But he passed away in 1936. And as a matter of fact, whenever I went back to Budapest after I came to the States, I always went to the cemetery. My grandfather, my father was there also. So that's basically all I can remember of him. Well, I don't remember. There's nothing I can remember. He died in 19, I was 2 years old.
Do you know what language they were speaking?
I know my mother, no, it's my grandmother, they speak Yiddish. I mean, besides they spoke Hungarian, of course, also. But my grandfather, I don't know. But I know my father and my grandmother, they spoke Yiddish a lot. So other than that, did they speak any other language? I don't know.
Can you introduce your father's brothers to us as well?
Sure. Okay, my second to my father was Vilmos. He was born, I presume, in 1907. As a matter of fact, he was the one I lost. He's the only one I lost. Well, not me, but he's the only one that died in the family during the Holocaust, because they went to the forced work with the Germans, so they were away a lot. And I don't know, I think he went to Russia and he didn't come back, but he was the second oldest. Then Henry was the next. He was also in Russia and all that, but he passed away in 1974. And the youngest, Jenő, he was born in 19... As a matter of fact, he was born the same day my mother was born, not the same date. My mother was born April 4th. Okay, April 3rd or 4th, they don't know. Okay, he didn't know. So, but anyway, those were the... And he passed away in Montreal in 1991. No, 1992, because I remember I was I don't know how you call the boy with the ring at the wedding, you know.
Yeah, ring bearer.
Ring bearer. I was the ring bearer at his wedding in 1941. And I remember that was a beautiful occasion, their 50th anniversary in Montreal. Of course, I was invited, but they had three kids. They had two boys and a girl, and one boy and a girl. They lived in Israel at that time, and they came as a surprise, and I mean surprise. They were one Shabbos. And okay, they made a whole big production out of the 50th anniversary. I was the first sort of a surprise, because behind the door, we talked behind the door, and I was there I tell them that they were really married because I was at their wedding, okay? And then came Robert, who is my cousin and right now lives in Montreal. He's the oldest. And of course, it's behind the boat, blah, blah, blah. And then came Andrew. He was and they didn't, and the couple, my uncle and my aunt didn't know they were coming. I mean, it was like, and unfortunately, they were Orthodox. But I couldn't take a picture because it's a Shabbos night. Of their faces, it was really unbelievable. The surprise. And then came Susie, their daughter. Also, as a matter of fact, Susie, they got married, I think married somewhere in 1973, Susie and Heshi. They met, Heshi, her husband, was born in Brooklyn. And she was born in Budapest and in 1952. So, but anyway, they met in Israel in 1973. That's where they got, I presume, fell in love, blah, 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 and all that. And they got married.
And so Yenu's wedding was in 1941.
Yes.
And can you tell us and spell us Yenu and also his wife's name?
Her wife's name is Magda, Magda. What was her maiden name? I don't know.
Okay. And they had, so your cousins are how many from Yenu's family?
Well, Yenu's family was three. Two, but unfortunately, two of them died. And I was their only cousin.
And what are their names?
One of them is Robert. The other one is Andrew. Howard Stock, of course. And Susan. And her name was, I don't know. I don't know her married name. I should know, but anyway, I don't.
So Vilmos passed away in the Holocaust without children and a wife?
Yes. Henry was married but didn't have a wife. And he passed away in 1974.
He didn't have children?
No.
Okay. Tell me more about your father's side. Did he tell you stories how they grew up as children together, the boys?
Not really. Not really. Okay. The only thing I remember is, I remember they called my uncle Yenu, that died in Montreal, they called him, her nickname was Coco. Now, I was in Australia in 1974. And we went to the Hungarian, my friend who came also out of Hungary, not with me, but at the same time. His parents went to Australia and he went, so I went there to visit him. And we went to a Hungarian club in Sydney. And we were, I guess we were having sort of a dinner. And all of a sudden, a gentleman comes to the table and he asked me if I'm Coco's son. Well, first I didn't know who Coco was. And then he said it was Jenner. I said, no, I'm Mano's son. Okay, Mano was my father's nickname. And so that's how I know, that's basically, and we talked a lot over there, they were playing soccer together on the street and all that. But that's how I knew what my father's side, they did when they were growing up.
So what stories did this man tell you?
I don't remember. I remember, but soccer mentioned soccer and all that, but exactly I don't remember.
Okay.
It was in 1974.
What type of education did your father receive?
My father's education was, of course, high school, and then what they had, the numerous classes in 1922 came in, and I don't know if he was not allowed to go to college or whatever, but there was what they called the Paul Getty education. I don't know what's in English, that's between not quite a university, but then sort of that level. I know he went there and he educated there, he graduated there, and that was his education.
And what was his occupation?
His occupation was CPA. He was, well, the only thing I remember is he was working, I think it was the Sun Insurance Company from England. He was working at the Gresham Polota, which is now
It's still Gresham.
Yeah.
Polota.
but it is a big hotel now.
Oh, yes.
But I know there was, because once I think my mother took me there. So that's why I know where he was working. I presume he was a bookkeeper at that time. And then after the war, he became a CPA, the communist and all that.
Do you know how your parents met?
No. I have a slight idea, but I'm not quite sure. I'm really not sure. I know my Erdei utca 8. That's the central. I think I know my maternal grandmother lived on the first floor. Okay, there was ground floor, of course, and there was a mezzanine. Okay, in New York, the second floor. Over there, it was, they called the first floor. And that's where we moved there during the Holocaust. I think my mother and her sister were living there with my grandmother. And I think my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was living on the second floor with the boys. But don't count me on that.
Okay. Do you or did you have any siblings?
No, I did not. Luckily,
Why?
because of the Holocaust. Because that would have been, I I can't emphasize it more than what my mother did during the Holocaust was unbelievable. And I mean, if you want to get to that, I'll tell you the whole story. But you know, I mean, again, my mother saved my life, and also, I don't know if you want to get to that story.
Yeah, let's start. Tell us the story.
Okay, now, first, March 19th, 1944. Are you familiar with Budapest reasonably?
Yes.
You remember where the Nemzeti Színház, the National Theatre was? Not where it is now, but the Blahaló is up there. Right at the corner of Népszínház utca and the Körút, there was a coffee house, which is now a McDonald's. But anyway, at that time, it was a coffee house, and my father, I don't know if with his brothers, but I know my father went there and was there on March 19th, which was a Sunday. And I was visiting, either I don't know, I probably went with him in the morning at 10, 11 o'clock. And we were going home for lunch or whatever. And all of a sudden, the Germans went down Népszínház utca. It's a reasonably big street. So I don't know, I know there was a lot of trucks, a lot of motorcycle. There might have been some tanks also, but I don't remember. But I know there's a whole big German unit went by while we were walking toward Teleki tér, because that's where we were living at that time. So we just went home, and that's where, I know that was definitely March 19th. So, and that time we got home, and my parents told me I wasn't quite 10 years old yet. That's when my mother and my father, one of them told me that watch out, don't go out on the street and all kinds of street, because the Germans took over. I don't know if it was that day or a couple of days after, but definitely, that they cautioned me very much. So basically, that's the story on that. And at that time, we were living Erdei utca 10, which is right across the street. It was a big building. We were living on the 5th floor. Well, in New York, it's the 6th floor. And we were living there. Okay. The earliest remember I have, as far as Budapest is concerned, that we were living Kenyérmező utca 8, which is between the Rákóczi út and Tisza Kálmán tér, which is második Pápa utca now, tér now. Anyway, that was around the corner of the park. That's where we were living. But that was somewhere 37, 38, 39. And then we moved, I guess somewhere in 39, we moved to Erdei utca 10. And my only recall of getting there first is, I presume my parents rented the apartment and we went there to inspect it or something. I went there with my mother and we got out of the elevator and it's a veranda, not veranda, how do you call that, front of the apartment. It's open, I'm sorry?
Gong.
Gong, that's right. It was a complete circle. And right across the other side of the gong was a little girl sitting in a chair, in a baby chair. I think she was about a year and a half old. A big, blonde, beautiful little girl. That's the only thing I recall how we moved in. Not we moved, but went to visit. For what purpose, I don't know. And then we moved there. That was one of the few places that we had indoor plumbing. Because my grandmother's place had no indoor plumbing. Right across the street, mind you. But what happened is, the way it was set up is, there were 6 apartments on the floor. Okay, it was my grandmother's building. It was a U-shaped building, and there was 6 apartments on each floor. There was 3 stories, plus a mezzanine. And the number 1, number 2, and number 6 had indoor plumbing. Number 3, 4, and 5, what happened is at the end of the gong, there was another room, a room with 3 toilets. Okay, in the apartment we only had a kitchen and a room, which may be not, I don't think even the size of this room. And only had cold running water. I remember, as a matter of fact, the water, when I got to these United States, that was the first thing that I really hit me, hot and cold running water. And it was like, wow. It's like, because I remember adults, when we were at number 10, we had a bathroom with a toilet, and we also had, said it was a bathroom with a tub, but the tub had only cold water with a heater. So you had to heat, it was a big tank, and you had to heat the tank before you take a bath. But once, we lived there till, as I said, in March 19th, 1944, we still lived there, that I remember. And my father was there also at that time. He wasn't taken away for work or forced work. And after that, I don't know, that was March 19th. I know it's late March or early April. What they did is they designated they didn't build a ghetto yet. They just designated certain houses as Jewish houses. So all the non-Jews, they moved out, and a lot of Jews moved in. I mean, as I said, we got lucky because, again, we got lucky because the 2 buildings on the street, they were number 19 and number 7, my grandmother's building. So we moved in with my grandmother. we didn't have, I mean, as I said, but I said the apartment was a room maybe the size of this room and a small kitchen. And had a little pantry in the back of the kitchen. That was it. And for that, okay, I guess we were lucky again. We only had 4 people, my grandmother, my mother, my father, and I. Because, I'm quite sure you heard the stories how people were shuffled into apartment of, for 20, 30 people in one apartment. But we were, again, we're extremely lucky because I can't remember that anybody with us, only the 4 of us. And we moved there, I guess, somewhere April or May. I don't remember the date of 1944.
And what do you remember from that period, being there together, the 4 of you, during a changing time and a dangerous time?
Well, whatever happened, okay, another date of, okay, the major day for me is Sunday. I'll tell you why. Because October 15th, I'm quite sure you know about that, that was also a Sunday. Okay, now, at that time, okay, my father wasn't home. My father was taken away for forced labor. And so it was my mother, my grandmother, and I. And for one reason or the other, okay, number 19 of Erdei utca was right on the corner of Népszínház utca and Teleki tér. And they crossed there. Kun utca, Népszínház utca, Teleki tér, Erdei utca. And number 19 was right on the corner. And for one reason or the other, I don't know why, they were shooting at the building, guns. And also, number 7 was visible from that corner. As I said, it was a U-shaped building. And I guess somebody told them that's also a Jewish building. I don't know why, but they were also shooting at number 7. As a matter of fact, when I went back, I don't know, about 15, 20 years ago, the bullet hole was still in the wall. I still saw them. Now they redo the building, they repainted and everything. So the whole thing is gone. But I remember when I went back, I saw them. So, but anyway, and whatever happened between, we moved in with my grandmother and October 15, I don't really remember. Okay, the only thing I remember that we were playing on the ground floor in the building because we were not allowed. So, but that's basically the only thing I remember. Other than, of course, my grandmother, my mother. And on October 15th, okay, the main gates of number 7 and number 10 was exactly opposite each other. Now the people was at the gates looking what's happening at the corner, and number 10 and number 7. And again, my mother said, let's get the hell out of here. So what we did, we started walking from the building toward another little park that's on the other side of the Erdei utca, Mátyás tér. And we were walking toward, okay, because when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my parents, they sort of forced me to learn somewhat play the violin. Now, why I'm mentioning it because the violin teacher was living at Baros utca and the Körút sarka corner. And my mother said, let's go over to the teacher. So we started walking that way. And once we hit Mátyás tér, there was 2 soldiers stopped us. I'm saying soldiers, not genders, not the gendarme, not the SS, not the Gestapo. 2 Hungarian soldiers stopped us in the park, just as we got into the park. And what they were talking about, I don't remember, but the only thing I recall is that the soldiers all of a sudden just left. What my mother said to them, I have no idea. But they left us alone and we went. Now, at that point, the only thing I remember, only thing I can recall is we slept at that time somewhere in the city, I presume in a tailor shop, because they had a big table, cutting table for tailors, plus there has a lot of materials. So I presume that was a tailor shop. As a matter of fact, there's a basement. That I remember as a basement. And we slept there, I don't know, 1 or 2 nights. I don't recall either how many nights, but I recall that we, at least one night, we slept there. And what happened after that, I can't recall until we got to, did we go back home to Erdei utca? I don't know. But the only thing I remember for that, we went to hiding. The hiding place was Bajnok utca 8, that I can remember. Now that was end of October or very early November, I don't know. But we were blocked in. Okay, I presume that was the superintendent of the building that hid us. Okay, now there was a pantry, a reasonable size, like, I don't know, but from the door to here and to the window. I know, actually it wasn't a pantry, I think it was a sort of a room for a helper, because it had the holes in the wall. Okay, it was behind the kitchen with a door, of course, and there was a hole for the chimney from both the room and from the kitchen. So because I know what happened is we got in there and, okay, as my mother told me, that he went and somewhere, I presume near Budapest, my mother went and got my father out of the camp. Just, I don't know how or why, how, I know why, but I don't know how. But anyway, we got locked into that room. As I said, it was either end of October or early November. And it was a gentleman, my father and I, in the room. Now what they did is they, as I said, they had a door, of course they had a door, and they had a big credenza in front of the door, so they didn't know there was a door behind it. Now they were feeding us through the hole, through the chimney hole, because it went through both, it was open for both ends. And now how we got rid of the waste, I don't know. But I know they were sort of, I think once or, okay. Now we were liberated by the glorious Russian army on a Sunday of January 14th, 1945. And up till that point, I guess we got out of the room maybe once or twice. You know, they pulled the credenza and came as a wash and all that. But I can't recall, can't really recall. The only thing I can, you know, after that, of course, that the street, the Bainokutsa, was liberated by the Russians on January 14th. So that's when we came out of the room. And I know we stayed there a few days because I don't know how long we stayed there after that. Because, all right, my father was taken away by the Russians. Also, where to, I don't know. But 2 days later, 2 days after the liberation, 2 days after the liberation, my father was taken away by the Russians. And he didn't get back for a couple of months. But I know we stayed there a few days because there was a lot of bombing and all that, so we stayed, after we were liberated, we stayed in the basement of the building. Was set up, you know, it looked like a very big basement with a lot of beds in it. And that's where I slept 1 or 2, I don't know how many nights. But then we went back to Erdei utca 7. So basically that's the whole thing over there.
Okay, I have a couple follow-up questions.
Sure.
So I'm curious about neighbors in, I guess we're talking about at least 3 apartments now. Erdei utca 7,
7.
19, right, where your grandmother was?
No.
That's 10, sorry.
No. My mother, my father, and I were in 10.
Okay, and your grandmother?
In 7.
In 7, okay, yes. And then the Bainokutsa 7. So do you remember neighbors, other people there?
Not the Bainokutsa 7, no. I remember some people, nothing that I can recall, but I know there were people there because we were sleeping in the bed. A lot of, I don't know, 10, 15 people. As I said, there was beds set up. Were sleeping in the basement, 1 or 2 or several nights. But the people I don't remember at all.
And you said that when you were living at home, you remember that you were playing with children. Was it in the middle of the gong? Or?
No, it was a U-shaped building. It was a ground floor. We were playing on the floor. As a matter of fact, I remember we playing Capitally, which is the monopoly of the American monopoly. The same, except it's Hungarian streets and all that. I know somebody had that, either I had it or somebody else had it.
And do you remember the friends you were playing
No.
with?
Well, I remember the kids that were in the building, but I was playing with them, I don't know.
Do you think they were Jewish neighbors?
Some, yeah. Well, at that time, everyone was Jewish because it was a Jewish designated house. Before that, there was Aryan in the building also, yes.
And so your father had been taken to forced labor camp. Do you remember when he was called in, the situation there?
No. I just remember, he was gone. I think at least twice, at least twice before 1944. But after, no, when the Russians took him, the only thing I remember that I was playing, okay, now at that time, the streets were without any cars. Any, I mean any. If one car came through the street, that was a big occasion, right? And I basically grew up on the street because it was very safe, and there was no crimes or anything of that sort. The only crime I remember, for one reason or the other, is that somebody cut a gentleman's tie. That was a big crime, as far as I could recall. Of course, I'm quite sure there was crime on the city, but that's what I can recall. So there was nothing, and I had my friend was living in 14. Was a very good friend. He became a very good friend of mine. By the way, he wasn't Jewish, but we were very friendly for a long time.
As children or also later in life?
Later in life, we were pretty well, not too much connected, but basically when we were somewhere, I would say from, okay. My first schooling started in 1940, elementary school. The elementary school was right opposite where we lived, in number 10. Maybe that's why we moved to number 10, I don't know. But it was, right across, wasn't even as wide street as 79th Street. It was a narrow street, and I went alone to school by myself. As a matter of fact, I remember the school, for one reason or the other, I remember the name of the teacher. It was Palashti.
Can you spell that, please?
Palasti.
And his first name?
I don't know. But his son was in the same class, and his name was Levente. Now, the only thing, now it's funny, but I was 6 years old, right? So, and it was Catholic country, and the school wasn't Jewish at all either. I probably was the only Jewish kid in the class. And they had done lacrosse. And so did I, because everybody did it, okay? And then finally somebody told me, no, you shouldn't do it. But that's why
Do you remember who told you?
no, but somebody told me, I guess you should do it. And so I presume I didn't do it after that.
So you still went to school when your father had been called in more than once
Yes.
to labor camp?
Yes. Yeah, but as I said, the school was right, not even a 5 minute away from. It was right across the street. And I got lucky because I got, okay, at that time the schooling was 4 years of elementary and 8 years of high school. There wasn't like junior and senior and all that baloney. Just 8 years of high school. So, and I started in 1940. So I finished my elementary education in early 1944. And so I of course I didn't go to school after March 19th of 1944. I guess next time I went to school was September of 1945. And that time I went to high school.
And a couple more questions about other people, and then I'd like to ask
Sure.
about your mother as well. So you said you spent one or maybe more nights in a tailor's studio
Shop, yeah.
or shop sort of place.
Yeah.
Was that with the help of your violin teacher?
No. No, there was nothing to do with it. We didn't get to the violin teacher.
Okay.
We went that way, but where we veered off, I don't know. But I know we didn't get to. As a matter of fact, his name was Kigyo.
Can you spell that, please?
Kigyo.
And what does it mean in English?
Snake. I don't remember his first name. I don't know. But
Oh, so this was his last name, not his nickname.
no, his last name, yes.
Okay.
Oh no, his last name. And I said, I can't recall that we got to him. Where we veered off or where we went, I don't remember. The only thing I remember that they were, as I said, we were stopped by Hungarian soldiers, luckily. And that's all I can remember for that. And after that, the only thing I remember is the tailor shop. And okay, before that, I can't recall when the Yellow Star was initiated, but my mother never wore a yellow star. And she had false papers to start with. Okay? But I remember, again, very clear, reasonably clearly, not very clear, reasonably, a Tisza Kálmán tér és a Népszínház utca sarkán, on the corner, there was a public toilet. A building, maybe a little twice the size of this room, half for men, half for women. Why I'm mentioning it is we got on the streetcar on Népszínház utca. Where I was going, I don't know, but anyway, okay, what my mother did with my mother did is he took my yellow star off. But there was lint left behind, I presume, because when we got on the subway, the streetcar, I guess was a nice lady. It must have been. And he pointed that the lints are still there. So what my mother did is, we got, at that point, there was a stop right in the corner of Nepsinaz and Tissakalmant here. And was a stop on the street guy. And he took me off, got into the toilet, and took all the lids off. And that I remember reasonably clearly. But what happened before or after, I don't know.
And when the soldiers stopped you and your mother, did your mother not tell you later what she told them?
No, I didn't ask. We weren't really talking about anything, anything of that era.
And okay, so describe to me a little bit your memories of your mother visually. Was she crying? Was she smiling? What did she show to you?
Okay, she was she was about 5'2". As you can see it on the picture, you can see the picture. She was a reasonably very good-looking woman, and she was extremely, not physically but mentally, extremely strong, extremely. I mean, go through what she went through. Again, I can only imagine, but. I never had. I always had unconditional love for her, and I always felt that I got unconditional love in return. So, she wasn't like a typical Jewish mother. I'm not saying that the typical Jewish mother is not nice, but she wasn't that good. She never took me to the park to play or anything like that. She had her own social life. As a matter of fact, the only thing I remember that my mother and my father had a disagreement. Okay. They were both card players. They played a lot of rummy. And there was quite a few clubs in the city. And they played in a club somewhere. Anyway, the only thing I remember for their disagreements was that I guess my father wanted to go to play, and my mother didn't want to let him go. And she stood in the doorway like this. And that's the only thing I remember, that they were disagreeing. It wasn't a heavy thing or anything. But what happened after that he went or not, I don't know. But I remember that she was standing in the doorway, well, letting him out. That's about it. Other than that, the only thing I can remember that they were okay. Also, my paternal grandmother was extremely religious, extremely. Okay, my father came out of an extreme Orthodox family. Now, my mother and my paternal grandmother wasn't too happy about each other. But I guess I credit my father for that. That even though they were not too friendly, they were friendly, of course, but they were respecting each other extremely. very much so. As a matter of fact, I remember when my mother was getting married the second time in New York. Okay, my grandmother, as I said, she was in the ghetto, the actual ghetto in Budapest, and it's November, December, January. And she was in the ghetto with her sister-in-law. Oh, her last name was Spatz, S-P-A-T-Z. That's her last name. It was Spatz family.
So her maiden name.
That was her maiden name, yes. And when I talked to Vilma, that was her sister-in-law, she said, we were talking about it, what happened in the ghetto, and she said that she basically had to force feed her because she was so Orthodox. Okay, now, I don't know if you know this Jewish, that if you have to survive, you can do anything. You can eat pork, doesn't matter. To survive, all the bets are off. Now, my grandmother didn't abide by it. But she was, so she mentioned, but as I said, but she survived the ghetto. As a matter of fact, she died in Montreal in 1969. Because, all right, so, but basically, that's about it. I don't know what else, unless you have other questions.
I do.
Good. Do.
Should we take a break?
If you want to.
A short break? So, okay, let's take a break.
Sure.
So I can go to the restroom. Okay, Tibor, let me ask you a couple more questions about your hiding experience. So you said there was a gentleman with you and your parents.
No, just my father.
Just your father and your mother?
She was outside.
Where was she?
I don't know. Where she slept, I have no idea. But she was supplying with food and anything. She was basically running around the city. Because, now, on October 15th, when we left the house and went to my violin teacher, my mother's mother was following us. Now, when the soldiers stopped us, my grandmother didn't stop, she just kept walking. So after that, what happened to her and where she was, I have no idea.
And so it was your father and you hiding.
And a gentleman. I have no idea about the gentleman. I know there was a gentleman, but that's all I know.
He was silent, kept to himself?
No, probably not. But...
this gentleman was in the apartment and not in the hiding part.
It was in the hiding part. It was in the hiding part. There were three of us in there. My father, the gentleman, and I. He talked, I'm quite sure he talked, but what he said, I have no idea. Or who he was, what his name is. I don't know, but I know there was a gentleman. That's all I know.
And do you remember the person helping you and your father to hide?
I think she was the super of the building. And I don't really remember her. I know it was a she, but that's all I remember.
And was it her or your mother who gave the food through the hole?
I don't know. I don't know. Bless you. Gesundheit.
And do you remember the type of food you received?
No.
Do you remember the sleeping arrangements you had?
The sleeping arrangement was on the floor. I presume there was some mattresses, but were on the floor definitely. There was no bed in there. There were no bed or cabinet or anything.
Do you think your mother and father had to pay for this arrangement?
I presume so, but I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised.
Do you remember any like specific routine or event while in hiding?
Okay, the only thing I remember there was, okay, the window for that room was up. It wasn't like down like this. It was up, and this is I think I remember that there was a little shed right next to the other side of the wall, and just above it was the window, and this is probably happened is that they were raiding the buildings, the Arrow Cross, and I think once, okay, I presume, I don't know if it was a Jewish house before, but there was nobody living the apartment above that I know. And I would say be 75% sure that once we had to go through the window because there was some kind of a roof, a little shed, and the roof, and climb into the apartment above, because nobody was living there. That I know, nobody was living there. But I'm almost positive we did that once.
Do you know why?
Yeah, because they were raiding the building. Okay, I think the lady that was hiding us, I think, again, it might be her boyfriend or somebody who was connected to the Arrow Cross. I think, and informed her there's going to be a raid on the building at that night. So that's why I'm very, very likely it happened that we went upstairs for the night.
And tell me, what do you remember about your feelings and your thoughts while in hiding?
Not really. As I said, I was just past 10 years old, and it was sort of an adventure. That's all I can recall now that I felt it was an adventure. So a lot of things happening. Oh, I didn't know why, and I didn't know what was happening really, because, as I said, because once I mentioned it that when we went home from the hiding place, I saw that body on the street. That was the only thing that really, as far as the atrocities are concerned. I didn't see any. I mean, thank God, a lot of people. As a matter of fact, you saw the shoes
On the Danube,
on the
yes.
Danube. I counted, I think it was 62 pair of shoes. I counted them when I was back there. But, a lot of things happened. A lot of Jews were shot into the Danube and all that. But for me, that was non-existent at that time.
How did your parents react when you, walking on the street, saw the dead body?
No, it was only my mother. But I don't know. I don't know if she saw it. Maybe she probably did, but I don't know. I don't remember. As a matter of fact, I don't remember reaction. Okay, the only reaction from I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I wasn't really structured as far as behavior or anything. I learned my behavior from my father and my mother. Now, I remember that also, that I was 7 or 8 years old. They sent me to the movies. They gave me the money to buy the ticket. And the movie was about 2 blocks away. It wasn't way away. I'm quite sure they followed me, make sure that I'm okay. But at that time, I went to the movies, and I bought the ticket. I went into the movies. What I've seen, I don't know. I don't remember what I've seen. But I was probably about 8 years old. And the only time, my mother's favorite weapon at me was the wooden spoon, or the kitchen wooden spoon. Okay. Now, of course, she hit me a few times, of course. But I remember that I was laughing at it. It was basically, I consider it a joke. I was 8, 9 years old. And before we moved in with my grandmother, we had the big table. And it was open up for a big occasion. It was braces under the table, holding the table together. So what I did, I remember, what I did is I took all the wooden spoons out of the kitchen and put in the braces. All of a sudden they disappeared. And I think what happened is they had a party or some kind. They opened up the door, the table, and all the wooden spoon fell out. And the only time I remember that my father was mad at me, and not necessarily mad, but what happened is, I was probably I was 9 years old, 8 or 9. I went to the Fradi, the Ferencváros, the soccer game. And it wasn't a game, it was just a practice. And I went there without telling them. Now, because I remember that's the only time my father got mad at me in my life. And I presume they got extremely scared what happened to me because I disappeared. And when I got home, okay, it was before we moved in my grandmother, the kitchen window, oh, okay, you don't remember, on the Ula youth was looking right at the Ula youth, and that was Osago Oti. I don't know if you know, you probably don't know about that. There was an insurance, some kind. But they had a big tower built, and there was a big clock on it. And the only thing I remember was standing at the kitchen window, and my father asked me what time it is, and he smacked me in the head. That's the only thing I remember that my father was mad at me. Other than that, my father was, I never asked a question, I never asked anything that I didn't get an answer for it, for my father. And I didn't get an explanation. Not just tell me, what's what, but why is it? So I guess that really made me what I am. Unfortunately, he passed away very young. He was 51 when he passed away. So
After the war.
yeah, he passed away in 57, 1957.
And you mentioned that your father's mother and the family was extremely religious. What about your household?
No, my mother's mother wasn't religious, I presume, at all. And they weren't on the religious side.
So you don't remember celebrating any holidays?
Oh yeah, I remember. Not on my mother's side, no. I remember we sent Pesach at my father's mother. I remember that because basically everybody lived in the same block. Different building, but same block. But I remember my grandmother, and after the war, for Friday night, my mother, my father, and I used to go to my grandmother for supper. But as a matter of fact, I don't know if it's fun. To me, it's funny. They after the war, they put out little books, stories. Two of the books I remember. One of them was, I don't know if you heard of Nisli Miklos. You do? Okay. The book was, I was Mengele's doctor in Auschwitz, and the whole story. And the other book I remember was a Narvik Kolland. Do you know Narvik was the heavy water for the Germans. That's where they tried. So there was a book about this size. It was little books, but one of them was was Nisli's book, and the other one was the Narvik Kolland. I was a lot more, not a lot, but more, but I don't remember more. But I remember those two. The Narvik Kolland, the adventure in Narvik, that was the Germans was trying to the heavy water. You know what the English did to destroy it and all that. Anyway.
Okay, let's go also back to your paternal grandmother, and she was in the Budapest ghetto.
Yes.
So, do you remember when you first found out about this?
I presume I found out right after liberation.
And so what was her experience there?
I don't know. The only thing I remember is what her sister-in-law told me, that she had problem eating, almost force feeding her. But other than that, I don't know anything. The only thing I know is that they were in the ghetto, the actual ghetto.
And what about others in the family? So let's start with your father's side. What happened to the two brothers?
Okay, one of the brothers, the youngest brother who's moved to later Montreal, he had a shop. The building where his mother was living, Népszínház 57, had a sort of a how do you know about the filling of the chairs and all that, that type of thing. I don't know what kind of a store it was, but they had the store before I think in early 40s, and when the communists came and took it away. But he was I presume owning the store. The other, okay, the only thing I remember the store. I'm talking about before 1944. I remember the store. That was in Népszínház 58. And the other thing I remember is that they also had these places for playing cards. There was in the Tisztakalmán there. And I remember when at least once, where my father and his brothers, they were playing cards there. Other than that, Henry, what he did before the war, I don't know. After that, he was a manager of a paint shop. Okay,
And how did he survive the war?
I don't know. I don't know. I know he went also forced labor, but how he survived, I don't know. But Vilmos, he passed away somewhere, Hungary or Ukraine or Russia or whatever. I don't know exactly where, but he's the only one that passed away in that side of the family.
And your mother's side?
On my mother's side, there was I had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cousins. Now the 2 of them, they were old enough to go for forced labor. But Joseph, he wasn't old enough, so they were all in Székesfehérvár, not in Budapest. And so Joseph, when he was taken to Auschwitz, when they cleared the countryside, The other two, they were in forced labor, so they weren't that taken. There was one Susan, also, that's my other Susan. I don't know what happened to her. I mean, she survived. I know because I know she survived, and my other cousin, my mother's, I don't know, real sister, the same. She was hiding also, and after that, I remember they told me that she also had meningitis. That's all I know. Plus, after the liberation, she stayed with us for a while anyway. And okay, now, her mother, Elizabeth, she left Hungary in 37 or 38. She went to England. I mean, got divorced and left her ex-husband and her daughter in Hungary. And she married an Englishman. Now, my mother went to visit her in England. I think it's 1938 or early 39. And when she came back, okay, she told me that. She told her husband, or my father, let's get the hell out of here. But my father, he did not leave his mother. That's why we stayed in Hungary. But her sister stayed in England. Her daughter was hiding in Budapest, somewhere in Budapest. Georgina, by the way, that's her picture up there. Well, she also died in Montreal.
This is your mother's sister.
This is my mother's sister's daughter.
Oh.
I have no picture. Okay, my mother's sister lived in England for a long time. Well, from 1930, I don't know, 36, 37, somewhere in there. I mean, Georgina, that's her picture. She was born in 1930. And and they moved. Okay, now what was it? They were living in London. She was married George in London. As a matter of fact, they came to Hungary in 1947 to visit. I remember we were living in that little building, in that little apartment, and we were having dinner. And it was George, Elizabeth, my mother, my father, I, and my grandmother. And after that, George, his name was Bradbrook, George Bradbrook. He got a job in Montreal. He was, I don't know what, but at that time, he was really making a lot of money. I'm talking about back in the early 1940s, making $30,000, $40,000 a year. I mean, that was big money. I mean, a Rolls Royce cost about less than $15,000. All right, so no, but anyway, they moved to Montreal. they also had their place in London also. They kept the place in London. So she, well, anyway, her daughter, okay, now let's go back to after the revolution. I'm talking about the revolution. She also left Hungary. Not the same, not with us. And her mother picked her up in Vienna and took her to, at that point, she took her to England. Elizabeth and George, they were living in Montreal, but as I said, they had their place in England also. And now, my father, okay, I was drafted into the Hungarian army in 1954. And, I went to serve, and I got lucky again. I got discharged from the Hungarian army 6 days before the revolution. And I got home, I got back. Anyway, when the revolution hit, I was in the Gellért Száló swimming. But anyway, the thing is, we stayed in Budapest till, okay, my father got very sick. He had lung cancer. Okay, he was also an extremely heavy smoker. But also, I don't know, probably the forced labor wasn't exactly healthy for her, so I guess a combination. But anyway, he had lung cancer, and he was, as a matter of fact, he was in the hospital, and I was out of the army already for about a month, and we were visiting him at the hospital, and he told my mother, get him out of the country, meaning me. Don't worry about me, get him out of the country. Okay, anyway, on November 24, it's important to remember because it made the difference in my life. November 24th, which was a Saturday.
1956?
56. We left Budapest. My mother, a sort of friend of mine, a kid of my age, we knew each other reasonably well, a gentleman and my mother, so 4 of us. We left Budapest. And I guess the same nights, same day, we left in the morning, and the same day we got to Győr. And we slept in Győr somewhere. I don't remember where, probably a hotel. Anyway, on the 25th, we rented a bus, 4 of us. And we got to the border. Now, that was on the 25th. And that's near Andau. I'm quite sure you know Andau.
In Austria.
Yeah. No, but it's right by the Hungarian border. So anyway, I remember we were sitting in a bench in a peasant's house. Quite a few people, not just us, but 10, 15, 20 people. And I guess when it got dark, the peasant came over and said, let's go. So we went and we got to a sort of a brush, and there was a opening inside of it, opening. And he standing the brush and he pointed, "Do you see the light there?" And of course he said, "Yes, that's Andal. Go." So that's how we got out of Hungary. Now, the first thing I saw when I got to Andal was at night, I don't know what, 10 o'clock, whatever. Anyway, saw my first jukebox. And it was, but anyway, next morning or next day, they put us on a train, I don't know where, nearby train station. Anyway, they put us on the train to Italy. Okay, so we got on the train, trot, going on the train, and we got to Vienna. And the train stopped in Vienna. Now, this is what I'm saying, my mother's father was married to an Austrian first. So at that time when she was, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years old, maybe less, they were spent a lot of time in Vienna, the family here or there. So at that point, okay, now I was as green as it gets because I was very well kept out of I was in the Hungarian army, but still I was very green. Anyway, we got to Vienna and the train stopped. And all of a sudden my mother said, "Let's get out of here." Because she remembered two cousins. Sort of half cousin, but one of them was Wilma and one of them was Steffi. I remember that. Anyway, it was Monday morning, maybe morning. Anyway, we got on the train, which is right middle of Vienna, and somehow I guess she found the address where to go. So we go to Wilma's store. She had a lingerie store.
Do you remember Vilma and Steffi's last names?
No.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. No, I don't remember the last name. But Wilma was the oldest. Steffi was the youngest, of course. And that was Monday of the 26th. And okay, at that time, Elizabeth, Georgina's mother, as far as we knew at that time, she was in Montreal. So my mother asked Steffi or Wilma, whatever, to call. And of course, the calling was like crazy. Finally got to Montreal on the phone, to Montreal on Wednesday, 2 days later. And George answered the phone. And my mother asked, where is Bergy? Elizabeth Bergy. Where is it? And George said, Bergy's in Vienna, at the Hotel Bristol. Okay. So and the chat, all that, and they hung up, and we went over to Hotel Bristol. And, by the way, my mother spoke 4 languages: English, German, French, and Hungarian. So anyway, we got to Hotel Bristol on the Kertner Ring, and go in there and ask, is Mrs. Bradbrook here? Mrs. Bradbrook left Monday morning. Okay. Anyway, so that we went back, and the next day or the day after, whatever, one gentleman, a friend of ours, was going back to Hungary and was taking the bus. And the bus was on Karlsplatz, the bus station. So anyway, we walked into the bus station, and on the way to Kärtnerstrasse and go across to Karlsruhe, right at the corner of the Ring and Kärtnerstrasse is Hotel Bristol. So on the way back, my mother goes in and said, let's go in there. Maybe she left a message or something. Anyway, we go in there and she asks, did Mrs. Bradbrook left a message? Mrs. Bradbrook, she's in room 182. Because what happened is when my mother talked to George, George got in touch with her in London. So she flew back. So that's what I'm saying, it's been a couple of days. So, big crying and all that. And anyway, what happened is, as you're going to see in the pictures over there, I'll show it to you. Bergie, Elizabeth, was very friendly with the Canadian Red Cross. So she got a job for my mother as a Hungarian interpreter with the Canadian Red Cross. Oh, by the way, the first night in Vienna, I slept in the jail.
How come?
Because there was no place in the police station. They put in the jail. No, they wasn't arrested. They just slept on. That's why I remember the first night. After that, we went to Hotel Vandal in Vienna. That's where we stayed most of the time. Anyway, okay, what happened is, that time Georgina was married already, and Bondi is her husband. They came out together, and him and Elizabeth weren't so friendly. So anyway, she took Georgie, to London without her husband. How? I don't know.
So what was Georgina's full name at this time? Do you remember that?
Elias, E-L-I-A-S.
That's the husband's name.
That's her husband. Her born name, or maiden name was Hajnal, H-A-J-N-A-L. That's how he was born. And anyway, she was in London already at that time because she took her to London. And anyway, as I said, once we got together, be crying and all that. And at that time, they started what to do with me. The two of them decided what to do with me. Okay, Bergie said, Elizabeth said, let's take him to London. Okay, I didn't speak any English. I only spoke Hungarian. Take him to London, learn English. In 6 months, I'll take him to Montreal. Okay. And then a little later on, next day or day after, whatever, my aunt also was an extremely strong personality. She said, why don't you stay in Vienna for 6 months, learn English and French and German, and then I'll take it to Montreal. Okay. So anyway, later there was some disagreement, so said forget it.
Why?
Because they were disagreeing so they finally decided United States. Now, this is why I'm saying the November is important, because at that time, the Americans said anybody that came out of Hungary in November will take him, regardless of number. So that's how I got here. Because Jenő, my father's youngest brother, they came out in December. So they were not allowed. That's why they ended up in Montreal. Because they had some friends over there who watched for them and all that. All right. But they wanted to come to the States also, but they made a pretty good life in Montreal also. Thank God. All right. Anyway, so that time there was a lot of disagreement, a lot of not too friendly letters and between. Okay, Elizabeth left Vienna on December 6th. I came back. Okay, she said, Tibi everybody called me Tibi, and my mother. I'm going back to Montreal. I'm not going to go to sleep. I'm going to get you a package. Okay, because we came out with 2 bags, all right, something like a bowling ball bag, that type of thing. That's it. That was it. Yeah. So I go and make a package, and I send it to you right away. Well, I finally got it in February. It was in early December. Anyway, so it wasn't exactly the friendliest thing, because I guess they were sort of clashed at each other a little bit.
Your mother and Elizabeth?
Yes, her sister. But anyway, so we decided we came to the States. And as a matter of fact, before that I went to register at the British Embassy to go to London. But
And what happened to the Red Cross job your mother got?
She was working.
In Vienna?
Vienna, yes. Okay, now, as I said, my mother wanted to get my father out of the country, out of Hungary, but he was extremely sick. So, as a matter of fact, my mother got an ambulance and everything, but he was too sick. And he passed away May 10th of 1957.
In Budapest?
In Budapest.
Do you remember which hospital?
No. At my grandmother's house. My grandmother had buried 2 sons. And that was one he buried. Well, he didn't bury, but got lost in somewhere in Russia, and my father died in her home.
Vilmos is the one who died in Russia.
Yes. And as far as I know, he died at her house. This is far. Maybe in a hospital, maybe not. I know, but as far as I know, in her house. So.
Do you remember when you received the news?
Yes. I received the news in was June 15th of 1957. Okay. Now my mother couldn't come to the States with me. I came alone, because at that time, if they had any close relation like children or spouse, they couldn't come. They weren't allowed to come to the States. But after my father died, so she arrived. She arrived in June 13th of 57. Now, I don't know if it was Thursday or Friday, but anyway, it was before Friday. The next Friday, okay, I left Vienna on the 27th of February of 1957. And with two hops, one in Shannon, Ireland, and Gander in Newfoundland, ended up at the we landed at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. And all Hungarian refugees. Okay, by the way, I was sponsored by the Highest, and you know what the Highest is. And they took us to Camp Kilmer. At that time, Camp Kilmer was the Hungarian distribution point. So they from McGuire Air Force Base, they put us on the bus to take it to Camp Kilmer. And since I was born and raised in Budapest, and also the same thing in Vienna, a lot of people are around all the time. And my first impression of these United States was, where the hell are the people? Because on the bus, I didn't see anybody at all. Maybe see one, I don't know, I was on the bus for a couple of hours, but maybe I'll see one people on the people. Anyway, we come to Camp Kilmer, and that was an army base at that time. I think it was an army base. Anyway, they had the PX open. And at that time, I was a very heavy smoker also. And I remember I got a carton of Pall Mall cigarettes. It was like, holy cow, this is like heaven. And I think it cost about $2. And they gave us some money, of course. And we bought it a PX. There was a PX. Anyway, they interviewed me over there also, this and that. And also I was interviewed by the World University Service. And, I graduated in Hungary, in high school and all that. But anyway, I forgot all about it. And in June, my mother came, and then she told me my father died. Now, she told me, I believe her on that account. She didn't tell me right away because she didn't want me to steal sugar. So, well, it's fine. Anyway, she came, okay, all right. At Camp Kilmer, I stayed there about 3 weeks. And they gave me two choices to go to. One was Boston, and the other was Washington, D.C. So a good old Hungarian boy, the capital was the biggie, like big deal. So I choose Washington. And they took me to Washington, D.C. And okay, the highest sponsored me my flight and all that to the United States. In Washington, the International Red Cross, not the Red Cross. Anyway, one of the the big company.
Was it Jewish?
No, it wasn't Jewish there. As a matter of fact, on my computer, they advertising a lot nowadays. Anyway, I'll let you know. Anyway, they sponsored me in. Okay, they put us in. At that time, I didn't speak any English whatsoever. They put us into Hartnett Hall, which is a bunch of little buildings on Peace Street and 21st in Washington, D.C. That's near DuPont Circle. Anyway, and also they put us into the Adams School, which is English as a second language school, to learn English. And they also, okay, now when I graduated high school in Hungary, I went into work in a machine factory as a helper. So anyway, but I had some idea as far as the lathe machine and all kinds of machines. So they found me a job in a small machine shop in just outside of Washington, D.C. And I worked there, and my mother came, I know, as I said, I think she came June 13th, arrived. Okay, she arrived at that time, Hotel St. George in Brooklyn was the Hungarian distribution center. So when she arrived, the next Friday, I came up to visit her. I was leaving Washington. I came up to visit her. Greet her, visit her, whatever. And also, at that time, it's gone. There was no, okay, if you were a couple, you stayed. But if you were single, you had men's floor, you had women's floor. And the hotel, it's a big hotel. And again, I got lucky. Now, I got the bus in Washington, D.C. to come to New York. It was a Friday, and I arrived around 6 o'clock in the afternoon, in June 15th or something. And that is ingrained in my brain because, as I said, as green as I was, in New York, I arrived at the Port Authority on 8th Avenue and 42nd Street. And that energy hit you. It was like unbelievable. Now, I'm saying I'm lucky because when I left Washington, they said, no, you got enough money, take a cab to Hotel St. George. Right. From 42nd and 8th Avenue, Friday afternoon. So I tried to machine. When I said Hotel St. It was 3 months of English, okay? Hotel St. George, forget it. Finally, one of the cab driver was, go down subway. Okay. So I got in, I had no idea where I was, of course. Go down the subway, and I got lucky. There was a little priest, about my size, little, was standing on the, and with 3 months of English, I explained I want to get to the Hotel St. George. And he said, come with me. And he got off one stop before Hotel St. George. I didn't know what, it was like, I have no idea where I was. But anyway, he said, one more stop, and it's right under the hotel. So, can you get any luckier? Anyway, then I got up there, of course, I kissed my mother and all that. And that was a Friday. And I think I had about $10 in my pocket, maybe. But anyway, we came into the city next day, into New York, into Manhattan. And the only thing I remember, I was walking by the wall because the taxis, the cars were taxis. I never seen anything like it. So I was scared shitless. Right? But anyway, but the next day, like I'm home.
Was your mother also scared?
No, she wasn't. Not that I know of. I don't think so. She was never scared of anything. Anyway, like the only thing I remember that we came up Broadway, walked or they took a bus. I don't remember. But I remember at the 84th and Broadway, there's a multiplex movie right now. That time it was a one-screen movie. And I got lucky again because, well, certain ways. There was a little jewelry store right next to the movie. And I had a Schaffhausen watch, which was a very nice watch. And we went in there and wanted to sell it. And I got lucky again because there's a little Jewish guy running the store, was his owner or whatever. He said, no, I'm not going to buy it because I can't pay enough for it. So that's why he didn't take. That's why I didn't. I mean, later on I sold the watch, of course, but anyway, I guess Sunday night I went back to Washington because I was working. I was working in Bethesda, Maryland. So, and the day after, or a few days after, my mother came also. Oh, the Hartnett Hall was small buildings with one rooms. So it was a stand-only room. Anyway, it was okay. And we started to get in a place. Oh, okay. Hartnett Hall was, I had a room, I had breakfast and dinner for 6 days for $17. Right? And I made $1.25 an hour. So basically it covered my expenses. And then we got an apartment on Massachusetts and 14th Street. And I guess somewhere in August or early September, I got a notice from the World University Service. I got full scholarship at the University of Minnesota. So that's how I got to Minnesota. And the International Rescue Committee. That's the name of the outfit. And they sponsored me, and they got me a sleeper to Minnesota. I mean, it was a day and a half, more than a day and a half on a train. So basically, I stayed there till Okay, now when I came, I didn't get a green card. I got a white card. Okay, it was, I got all the advantages of the American citizen except couldn't leave the country. That was the only hang up. Well, I wasn't anyway, but to get back to my aunt, Georgina's mother, when I got to Washington, D.C., no, when I got to Camp Kilmer, my mother told me to, when you get there, call Brigitte. Yeah. So I called her, and she said, Tibi, next weekend I'm coming down to see you. She's still coming. Okay? So that's what I was just saying. This one. Well, anyway, that's under the bridge. It's nothing to get excited about. And well, anyway, I got to University of Minnesota, and after graduation, I got my green card, and I was drafted in the American Army.
And what have you studied at the university?
Business administration. Anyway, I got, okay, I graduated in 3 years because I got 1 year credit for Hungary. Anyway. So anyway, I got my green card somewhere in late 59, early 60. And in 1960, I was drafted into the Hungarian army.
The U.S. Army.
The U.S. Army, yes. So I went to, first I went to basic training was at Fort Riley, Kansas. I gained 10 pounds at basic training. Yeah, but anyway, I said I served 2 years in the Hungarian army before, so I got my orders after finishing basic training to 2nd Infantry Division, Fort Benning, Georgia. I said, I don't want to go. I don't want to be infantry baloney. So I signed up for construction drafting, whatever that is. Okay. Anyway, and that was at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. So I got to Fort Belvoir, where first that was the first time I flew from Vienna to U.S. on a prop plane. But the first jet I flew from somewhere in Kansas, from Kansas City to LaGuardia, not LaGuardia, Kennedy. Well, that was Idlewild at that time. And anyway, I stayed a couple of weeks. My mother was living at 103rd and Riverside Drive. It was a residential hotel. I stayed there, I guess, a week or so. Anyway, then I went to Fort Belvoir. I stayed there for 15 weeks or something. Anyway, and again, I got a leave. I came back to New York at that time. My mother, I guess she was engaged or whatever, but I met David, her future husband at that time. No, at that time, her husband, because she knew that I was attached to my father, so she didn't tell me that she was married. I mean, before I saw her face to face.
What was David's full name?
Maged, M-A-G-E-D. And anyway, in Fort Belvoir, I got an order to Fort Gordon, Georgia. It was a small base. Anyway, first I think I came to, no, I came to Baltimore because they were in Baltimore. My mother and David, they were in Baltimore with some relatives over there. Anyway, I got on the train. I got on the train. And that was my initiation into all the anti-Semitism and thing to the U.S. because I was either in New York or Baltimore. I took a train to Fort Augusta, Georgia. Now, again, I was as green in that respect anyway as anybody can get. And I got on the train at Augusta, Georgia, and it says blacks, whites. I said, excuse me, what the hell is going on? And that was my initiation that something is not exactly right. But anyway, that was my birthday also, July 21st. I got into Fort Gordon, and I guess the same day or next day, the initiation, what are you going to do with me? I got to the guy, and the guy was from Minnesota. And he hasn't been home for 2 years. So we started, and I was in Minnesota 6 months before. So we started talking all that. And he made again, I got luck. He said, do you want a good job? I mean, I didn't say almost, but I thought, what a stupid question. Again, of course I want a good job. So what he did is he sent me down to the hospital, medical records. So that's what I did. And I became a medical record clerk. And that was, as I said, in July of 1960. 1960. And I don't know, I guess it's September, October, I got orders to APO, Army Post Office. Any Army base outside of the United States is an APO, Army Post Office, and a number. Okay, I got to go to APO 438, San Francisco. There's a separation point, San Francisco, California, via surface travel to Hawaii. But what the hell is APO 438? It turned out there is Tripler General Hospital, which is one of the biggest hospitals ever. All right. Anyway, I got again. I got to New York. I got some leave. I came to New York. I stayed here for about, I don't know, a couple of weeks, and then I flew to San Francisco. I remember it cost me about $100, and David paid for it. Oh, by the way, he was also an extremely Orthodox Jew. However, he was a modern one. My meaning, He never wore a Jewish grab. And when I came back, the only thing he asked me to do, to wear a yarmulke at the Shabbos table only, and don't smoke at the Shabbos table, because I was a very heavy smoker at that time. And so was my mother. So what we did is we had dinner and then went to the living room and smoked. And he didn't care, he didn't mind. You know? And as a matter of fact, you know, the house was basically kosher, but in the fridge, my mother always had a little salami and korma. I don't know, but that type of a man he was. And also he was out of Auschwitz, and he lost his wife and daughter there. And he had the number and all that.
Was he a Hungarian survivor?
Yes. He was felvidéki, and his brother also, Aaron, his brother, he was living in Brooklyn. Now he was an extreme Jew, and they owned some nursing homes, somewhere in 74th Street and 73rd, 74th, Central Park West. Anyway, when I went to Hawaii. I stayed there for 27 months. And when I came home, his brother offered me a job at his nursing home. I'm talking about this in 1963. $400 a week. I mean, it was big money. But we were staying at his house in Brooklyn at a big, a 3-story family house. And we stayed there one holiday, I don't know. Anyway, when I went down, I think the 3rd floor was an apartment where I stayed. And when I went down to breakfast next day, the first thing he asked me, did you daven? At that point I said, I don't want, no thank you. So I didn't take the job. Right. My mother had a small business, which I got involved in for a while, and then, when I got to Hawaii in the Army Hospital, I was an ambulance driver and an admitting clerk. Basically, admitting clerk, but also an ambulance driver. So what I did when I got back and, my mother wasn't too savvy about business. She thought she was, but anyway, we didn't agree. So what I did is I went and got a job. I was working as an admitting clerk in Brooklyn at Wyckoff Heights Hospital. Now, the thing is that when I got to the Wyckoff Heights Hospital, the head of the admitting office was a retired Army sergeant major who was the sergeant major of the Tripler Hospital in Hawaii. Before I was there, but the same hospital. So just coincidence. But anyway, so basically, then I got married, and
to whom?
To Arlene Hershkovitz.
Tell me about Arlene.
Okay, we met at the poker table. Okay, when I got back to New York after Hawaii, after I got out of the American Army, the Hotel Ansonia, I'm quite sure it still has the place, was a Jewish social club. Later, did you hear about was it the gay club, the very famous gay club? Anyway, it later on became a very famous gay club.
Not Club 54.
No, Club 54 wasn't a gay club. I mean, gays were, but this was, no, it was very, very famous. I don't remember. Anyway, at that time, it was a Jewish social club. It was considerably a beautiful place. It had a swimming pool down in the basement with a steam room and had a billiard room on the first floor, table tennis, and on the second floor, it had a sort of a little bit of a social club with a small food place, and it cost $35 a year. So I joined it, and upstairs they had quite a few poker games, and I played poker also, and so that's where I met my wife. She was also playing poker. Well, anyway, we got married. It was somewhere in not somewhere. It was Thanksgiving weekend, 1965. And was married for 7 years. And that's about it as far as that goes. But anyway, in Hawaii, okay, it was there in 60, 61, 62, no, 61, 62, and 63, part of 63. They had a setup for not computer. There was no computers already yet. I'm talking about there was computers already, but not in all over the place. But they had the electronic accounting machines, IBM, also IBM, but the 350, 403s, 407s, it wasn't computer yet. Anyway, I got very friendly with the sergeant that ran the place. And okay, I would say at least 75% of my stay there, I was playing 4 days on, 2 days off. No holidays, no weekends, 4 days on, 2 days off. That's how we worked. Anyway, and also I was working at night from 11 till 8 in the 12 in the 8 in the morning. And the sergeant that ran the accounting machines, he got pretty friendly, and I basically learned the processes, how it goes. So when I came back and I got the job at Wyckoff Heights Hospital, I didn't especially like it. It was okay. And then, and also the Wyckoff Heights had an extension in Queens, which was where I was living at that time. So I transferred over there from Brooklyn for a while. And then, as I said, I didn't like it, especially like it, so I started getting into data processing. And I went to school in Brooklyn and that's the first time I saw a computer, an IBM 1401, which I actually don't know what I'm talking about. But that was a computer. Okay, so that's how I got basically, the school that I went to, the data processing school, rented time at the computer outfit, to show us, sort of student, the computer. And I got, again, friendly with the guy that ran the shop, the computer shop. And I guess he liked what I was doing, because he said, once you finish school and got a little experience, come and maybe we have a job for you. And they did. So at that time, my first job was at NCR, the National Cash Register Company, that had a computer outfit on 60th and Madison in the second basement. Anyway, I was working there for about, I don't know, a few months. And then I called Joe. He was the manager of the place that rented from the school. And I told Joe, and I went in for an interview and they hired me. So I was working there. The only thing I remember, Martin Luther King was shot when I was working. I was working at that night. I was working from, I don't know, 3 to 11. After that, I was working there for a while, and I was sort of, I didn't like it, whatever. Anyway, I started looking for another job. And I got a job for the Bond Bakery in the Bronx. At that time, of course, I had a car. And there was an NCR computer there. So I was basically, at that time, was reasonably educated in the computer, so I was running the computer there. And I guess I didn't like that either for running the other. No, I wasn't running that, no. But I went to get another job. A container company in 2 Broadway. And that's when I first got acquainted with the big IBM machines. But anyway, somewhere in, I guess that was August or September of 1970, I was laid off. Because I was the last first out. But anyway, the guy, again, I got lucky. Because the guy that, I got pretty friendly with the guys over there. And he said, why don't you go and apply at Liberty Travel, was looking for a data processor. And that time, the main office was 42nd Street between 6th and Broadway. And I went and I got a job there. And I was with them for 19 years. And I was yeah. Okay, what was happening is I was living here. I left my wife in 1972, in December. Uh, wasn't that I was unhappy, but I was very much the king of the house. I didn't like that. There was no challenge. So actually one day in December of 1972, I said, I'm not coming home. I mean, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but that's what I did. And at that time, again, I got lucky because Aaron, my mother's husband, brother, his wife died. So my mother and David and Aaron were very close. So every night for about 2 years, they stayed out there. I mean, they were coming here on daytime, but so I had this place to myself, even though they were basically living here, but they weren't living because they were staying out there every night. So.
And what happened to Arlene?
I don't know.
She was living here?
No. Oh no, we lived in Queens. You know where the Jewish Center? No, on Queens Boulevard. Well, anyway, it's, next to the Lefrak building, not the Lefrak City. There's a big Lefrak building on Queens Boulevard, and we were living right behind it for 7 years. But I left. The only thing I took is my clothing and my stamp collection. That was it. And
you never got remarried?
no. No, she talked me into going to see some people, but
Who? Your mother?
no.
Who talked you into it?
Arlene.
Oh.
To see some consultation, marriage consultant and all that. But no, it didn't. Again, they were really lovely people. I mean, the whole family was very, very nice, but I just somehow didn't. So, okay. After that, okay, I used to play a lot of bridge. I'm still playing on computer every now and then. But I used to play a lot of bridge, and then I had the bridge club was on 70th and Broadway, near Broadway. And was 70th and 71st. And Marty Cohn was my partner, was the standard partner. And we used to go to tournaments, big tournaments. And once we played against her. And she came to our table, or we got to her table, whatever it was. And that was probably 1974, 75. And somewhere in I think it was 1986, I got a call from the telephone company. Is it okay if they take my name off the phone at the place where I was married? I said, of course. So basically that's my story. And I worked for Liberty Travels for almost 20 years. I'd done a lot of traveling, very, very good prices. I went all over the Caribbean, and I remember, well, as a matter of fact, in 1972, before I left, it was August 1972, before I left my wife, we went to Hungary. Well, we went to I went to landed in Vienna first, and then I drove into Budapest, and then I drove to Munich and to see my cousin there. As a matter of fact, you know, that's one of the thing is my cousin that got to Auschwitz, and then in one of the marches or whatever, I don't know. But anyway, he got to Dachau in Munich, and he stayed there, and I visited a lot. And he said, you know, what really gave a lot of not information, but a lot of cleaning is, he said that the Germans, they were doing it because they believed it. But the Hungarians, they do it because they enjoyed it. I don't know how is it now, but I remember once, I don't know, about 30 years ago or so, I went to Budapest a few times. And I remember I was riding on the streetcar, the number 2 streetcar on the Dunaj. And one of the kiosks had an anti-Semite, drawing on it. I mean, it was really anti-Semite.
What year was this?
I would say about 35, 40 years ago. I don't know what it was. I should have gone back and take a picture of it, but I was definitely an anti-Jewish thing.
Which cousin was who you mentioned who was in Auschwitz and then ended
Joseph.
up in Dachau?
Joseph.
His last name?
Brust, B-R-U-S-D-T.
And so he was liberated in Dachau and he
Yes.
stayed and lived in Germany?
He stayed in Munich. As a matter of fact, he had a lot. He was very sick when he got to Dachau. Who else didn't? As a matter of fact, his father and his uncle also died at Dachau because they were with him. And first he married a Jewish lady, and then he got divorced. Then he married a German lady who converted to Judaism. And she was with him forever. And I think he died about 10 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago. As a matter of fact, they took very good care of him, the Germans. As a matter of fact, he had his own parking spot on the street. So.
Tell me about your visit back to Hungary, did you go back to your old house, your old apartment?
Yeah, that's what I said, that, okay, first time I went back in 72 with my wife at that time. And as I said, the bullet holes were still in the building. When I left Hungary, the gates on every house were wide open. But when I got back the first time, they were closed already. They closed all the gates. So I didn't really get into the building. I mean, I went by the building. As a matter of fact, they mentioned that little girl that when in 1939 I saw on she was still living there when I went, and I went to her, the number 10, and we went to the Bronsteins. I think Bronstein was a sort of a kosher style restaurant. Rosenstein, that's the one. Yep.
And you talked with her, reminisced about
Yes, we
the wartime?
did. Yes, we did. Well, as I said, she didn't really remember too much of wartime because, as I said, it was 19, I guess it was maybe 38 or 39. And she was maybe a year and a half old. So maybe she was six years old when the whole thing happened.
What's her name?
Grossman Zsuzsi. Grossman Zsuzsanna.
Was she also Jewish?
Yes.
And she survived in that building?
The last time I was there, she was still there, yes.
And what happened to your apartment? Was that your parents' apartment or was it a rental? Do you think
Oh, it was a rental only. Nobody owned any apartments over there.
And did you visit your father's grave?
Oh, many times. As a matter of fact, I have some pictures on my computer.
We can show that later.
I will try. I think I can find it.
Okay. Okay, let's take a break now, please.
Take your time.
So you were saying?
It was a one-story, number 9 was a one-story building. And they saw basically the floors in my building. And I remember one was a little crippled, extremely anti-Semite. Well, he had trouble with his foot. And I remember she was screaming at us from number 9. I mean, it was, very, very nearby. And also, I remember slingshots. The slingshots broke the windows.
This was in 1944.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, of course. Because now it's a parking place. But that time it was a one-story apartment buildings.
So these were basically some neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah, the neighbors I remember reasonably well. I mean, on the same floor, number 1 was the Schwartzes, which were Jewish. Number 2 was not Jewish. I'm talking about after 45. And number 3 was also another Schwartz, also Jewish. Number 4 was Christian. And we were in number 5. And number 6 was also Jewish. So it was basically a Jewish building. I know the third floor, number 5 was Jewish, and third floor number 3 was not Jewish. Machko, that was the name of number 3. On number 5, on the third floor was Klein. I don't know the red. Klein Agi, Klein Agi was my age. Machko was in number 3. That was also Shuji. They weren't Jewish. And basically, on the second floor, number 2 was Rosenfeld, was also Jewish. And when it's way after the 47, 48, 49. On number 6 on the second floor was a wife of an Avo Tist. You know what Avo is?
Yes.
Alon Védelmi Hatóság. Oh, by the way, I think I got lucky again because I was interviewed in 1954 for military service. And I think they wanted to get me into the AVH. But I told them that I got an aunt in England, so that took care of that. So that's why I just went into a regular army.
Why did your father tell your mother when he was in the hospital to take you out of the country immediately?
Take a guess. I mean, because the situation was the communist situation and all that. Well, you know, I'm quite sure he didn't like the whole situation, you know.
So you mentioned that you didn't really talk about your experiences and memory of the Holocaust with your mother afterwards.
True.
Can you elaborate why?
No, nothing special. It just didn't come up, and I guess I'm not the curious type, you know, and I don't think she would have had any problem talking about it, but we never really talked in that respect.
And what about with the experiences of her husband David here in Brooklyn? So do you remember conversations?
Not about that, no. No, the only thing I remember, I know, is that he lost his wife and daughter in Auschwitz. And he had the numbers, I saw that. But other than that, not really.
So how come you decided to give the Shoah Foundation an interview today?
Because they asked me. I didn't ask for it. But they asked me, I said, fine, why not? I mean, I was, you know, I remember went to Yad Vashem, and they looked up, they had my uncles wrong. I mean, as far as age is concerned. But, you know, I straightened that out. But nothing special. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Israel.
Do you talk about your experiences? Did you talk about your experiences to others?
No, other than that, I showed you the school. No, not really.
Can you tell the viewers what school that is and what what the whole event is?
It's on the, why don't you go in there and there's a blue little block on the table that shows you the, what, it said you want to go there anyway, right?
Yeah.
So that's a Jewish school. Yeah. Yeah, that's the Manhattan Day School, but that's Jewish because it says yeshiva or Talmud. What is that? Torah. So that's a Jewish school, and I guess they said the same names, not numbers. That's the program. That was and you know, on May 22nd, they're gonna have they interviewed me with a lot of kids, 8th grade kids, interviewed me. I mean, they set up the questions, of course, and which I can't blame them. And they were very nice. Of course, they treated me very nice, and Shoshana is the basically she set up the questions because I said the questions were asked by the kids, and she was the coordinator of the whole thing. And it was about 2 months ago or so, and it says on the 22nd of May, they showed what happened, you know, what the discussion was all about. And the name of the school is Manhattan Day School, but it's the Jewish school.
Did your mother ever talk about the Holocaust to others?
I don't think so.
Please tell us about her life after coming to the U.S. So you talked about her arriving to the U.S., having her own business, and then she got remarried. How long did she live, and what was her?
She had her business first at the corner of Broadway and 81st Street on the second floor. And after that, okay.
What kind of business?
All right. Now, when I got to Minnesota, and she came to Minnesota after me, and she was reasonably Hungarian. I'm talking about my mother. And of course, she looked up and then she met a lady, and I remember the conversation. Or what type of person was my mother? Got a name, a Hungarian name, Körner. And she called her up. And they started talking, and I guess Maria, Körner Maria, I know them very well also. After that, I don't know, she asked my mother something, and my mother said, and I can't recall, don't worry about it, I'm going to see you anyway, I'll let you know. You know, but anyway, that lady was working for a vestment company. You know what a vestment is? For the Catholic priest, the vestment. And she worked for a company that done the bannering, the all the forms on it, all the thing, how they got there with machines and all that. And she got a job for my mother, a Catholic vestment company, my mother. And that's when she learned the banner machine, which is something like a Varrogape, but you control it and you make the all kinds of pictures on the fabric. So that's where my mother, and that's where she made her business. She made after, when she got to New York, she got bags, ladies' bags with the banners on the side, with all kinds of forms and things. So that's where she made but we were very friendly with the Kerners. As a matter of fact, our first, when she came after me to Minnesota also, we got an apartment right next to the Capitol in St. Paul. And I mean next to the Capitol, with just a street taking away from us from the Capitol, which is torn down now by long ago, but we stayed there. And after that, she went to Miami, and she became a manicurist in Miami. And then I guess she got enough of it, so she came to New York. And she had some friends in there, and there was I don't know if it's still there, a corner of 70th and Broadway. There's a hotel, and there was a Hungarian card club in there. And that's my mother went. How she got there, I don't know. But anyway, that's where she met David. David also was playing some cards, I presume. But that's where they met, and after that, they had a Hungarian club in 73rd and Central Park West. So that's where my mother used to go a lot. And also, as you can see over there, there's a few bottles of wines there. Now, there's a story behind it, because my mother had a friend, and she was reasonably rich. She had a boutique on Madison Avenue, that rich. Okay, I remember I went to the store, and I'm going back at least 30 years now. She had a dress shop, a dress boutique, and I think the cheapest was about $2,500, something like that. Yeah. Anyway, now she was also a gambler, okay, and she was gambling in Atlantic City, and she gambled so much that they were comping her in the hotel. Plus, they sent up a limousine for her. Now, and my mother was a very good friend of her, so they also picked up my mother. So that's where, in the hotel, she picked up the wines. And those wines are 20, 25 years old. I don't think, right? So it just stayed there. And I mean, my mother gambled also. As a matter of fact, she still owes me about $5,000. No, I mean, I don't care, but a couple of times. Oh, it was when I was married, and my mother was going over to Nice, the French Riviera, with her sister, and a couple of times she called for money, called me for money. Now, my wife got teed off, but I mean, thank God we could afford it, okay? And as long as I was married, whenever I lent her money, she always gave it back when she got back. Right? So I know whenever she called for I need $1,000 or $2,000. But anyway, my wife was always teed off. Why? I said, listen, can we afford it? Yes, send it. I don't care what she needs it for. And as I said, I know that she's going to pay it back at that time. I mean, after that, she didn't when I was divorced, which is fine. I am not complaining. Don't misunderstand me. Okay, but I'm saying she still owes me $5,000. But it's fine. Okay, but a couple of times she called me from Atlantic City.
So did she grow old together with David here in New York?
No, David died, unfortunately, in 1976. In January 76. And he died, I think it was a Monday morning, in January. I think, and he's buried in Bnei Brak the next day. His brother, as a matter of fact, my mother, I don't know, I'm not blaming her, I'm not criticizing her. She didn't go to the funeral. She got torn up. She went to California for a couple of weeks. But Aaron made the arrangement, and the next day, I think he died Monday morning, and Tuesday he was buried in Bnei Brak, in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, well, next to Tel Aviv. But this was in 76, and and we went to okay, Aaron, and he was reasonably well off, money-wise. A couple of nursing homes. Anyway, they had an apartment in Jerusalem. So somewhere, I don't know, in April of 1976, David was buried in January. And in April, my mother and I, we went to Israel. That was the first time I went to Israel. And the apartment was in Jerusalem. Very nice apartment. I remember we got into a bus. And the bus was basically empty. There was another woman and then a very, very extremely Orthodox man, with all the garbs and the whole thing. And it was pretty warm. And he was sort of sleeping by the window, one of the windows of the bus. My mother and I we got to B'nai Brak, and I don't know for what, but she went over and she shook him, asked him some question. And the poor guy almost fell out the window because, an Orthodox Jew and a woman shaking it, it's like, ah. But anyway, then the same day after we went, okay, the lady that owned, well, not owned, but owned the next apartment where we had in Jerusalem was very friendly, very new. And she knew Aaron, the whole family. So she gave us she wrote down where David was buried. So, a piece of paper in Hebrew. Anyway, we got to Bnei Brak. And Bnei Brak, there's four cemeteries. And we had no idea, where. So there comes a gentleman. He's definitely Orthodox, but he's a very modern grab, suit and tie and all that. And for one reason or the other, my mother is holding the paper, right? No. And they asked, talking to the guy in English. He spoke very good English, of course. And the guy said, give it to him, meaning to me, the paper, because he did not take the paper from her. So finally I grabbed the other paper from her. And he put us into a taxi to the cemetery. Anyway, on the way back, I don't know, have you ever been in Israel? You know what the Sharut is, right? Well, that's basically the transportation between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and all that. And that time it was a 7-person Mercedes. So anyway, we got to Sharut station going back to Jerusalem. And we got to the station early in the sense that there was nobody sitting in the Sharut yet. So at that time, both my mother and I were both smoking. So we sat in the back. It's a 7-seat, three, and 1, beside the driver. So we sit in the back, both by the windows. And there comes three guys sits in the front. One sits in the driver's seat. And there comes a woman. And the woman will not sit beside me. So finally my mother, she got teed off so bad, but she had to sit in the middle. Because she would not sit beside me. So, but, that kind of woman she was.
How long did she live?
Oh, she was almost 94. She died, I think it was December 2nd. The 2nd or 4th, I think somewhere in the box over there, papers, in 2002, in Lenox Hill Hospital. As a matter of fact, I took him in there. It was 6 o'clock. And it was reasonably good shape. Right then, I don't know, about 8, 9 o'clock, I got a call from her doctor that she passed away. And she would have been 94 in April, and she passed away in early December.
Okay, to finish soon our interview, I would just like to ask a couple of concluding questions.
Sure.
How did this experience impact you, your identity, and or your faith, religion?
Well, I never really had faith. I know that because, okay, when I went to, okay, that was after after my bar mitzvah, but there was only 5 Jewish kids in the class, and sometimes we went to the shul for education, religious education, and it was, I might have been about 14, 15, and I was sitting in the shul. The rabbi was talking, and I was thinking, what the hell am I doing here? So that's basically, I never really, as I said, believed in religion as a religion. As I said, I'm a cultural Jew. I really enjoyed all the holidays and everything, but I know kind of the humanist, just and nothing really. So it's and it hasn't changed for 90 years. I mean, still feel the same way. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I respect. If you believe, that's beautiful, but don't push it on me. And unfortunately, that's what's happening. A lot of they pushing their religion, their faith on people, and what I believe in God haven't been proven yet. I mean, I don't say there is no God, but there is God has never been proven yet to that extent that it would convert me to any kind of religious belief. I mean, I heard a lot of things, and the Bible and the Torah and the Quran and all that, but they're just books. I mean, it's very interesting, but historical sense is interesting, but that's about it.
Is there anything else that you would like to add that maybe I didn't ask you?
Not really. I think it's a really comprehensive discussion.
I actually just remembered one question that I forgot to ask, but I'm curious. Did your mother ever go back to Hungary?
Oh, a lot. I mean, she was, okay, as a matter of fact, it took a while before she admitted that Hungary is an anti-Semitic country. She didn't, because when she was born, or she was raised, 1909 till 1920, was a beautiful place. I mean, Budapest is a beautiful place. It's gorgeous. I think it's one of the best built city. But when they ask me if they ask me to go, when they go to Hungary, they go to? I said, as long as you don't speak the language, you should go to.
The Hungarian language?
Yes. Because when I went back, I like the public transportation here, anywhere. And I took a lot of streetcars, and what some of them I heard on the buses or the street or subway was ridiculous, really. And as I said, they had that kiosk on the number 2 train. So
So you sense there's more anti-Semitism in Hungary
I don't know.
than
No, I don't know. Could be. I mean, I can't. Right now, I haven't been there for about 15 years, so I don't know. I mean, okay. There is a couple of very good shows about the Holocaust and Budapest and all that. So they might be getting better, but I'm not saying one way or the other because I don't know. But when I was there, and okay, when I was there, really wasn't that much showing much anti-Semitism because communists are not exactly they don't they're not really anti-Semite, they're anti-everything. Okay, so but no, as I said, I don't know what, but as far as this Orban thing is totally, and I mean, I'm sort of glad I'm 90 years old, especially if Trump comes back again. I mean, that is, I don't know where you got off Trump, but when he said that they're going to build a wall and Mexico will pay for it, I said, he's stupid. He's totally out of his realm. And then he started I don't know. But as I said, I don't care really, not anymore. I'm outside, I'm looking in, I'm enjoying the view. That's all I can say.
Okay, so this is the perfect way to go to our last question. What would you like to tell future generations? What's your message?
Education. That's it. Education. Because I think that's the biggest problem. I mean, I listen. I don't know if you do listen to a lot of atheist channels. You should. Matt Delahanty and Christopher Hitchens and all that. No, but what I found is, especially the Bible Belt of the South, I'm not going to tell you. I want you to look at it. Just look into it, and if you don't, But I do listen to it quite often. Right now, especially, as I said, my mind is about 35, 40 years old, but my body is 90. So I don't move too much, and I have I do a lot of searching, and that's why I said the future is basically education. That's the main thing. There are other things also, but education definitely, because this country's education is the shithole.
Okay.
I mean, like when I went to school, I'm talking about high school. We got into the school at 8 o'clock in the morning, first day. They gave us the schedule. You had your choices. Choice of language. Over the first 3 years, you had the choice of language. German, French, English. After the third year, Russian. That's it. Or you can go to the medical field and you learn Latin, or the physics field and learn mathematics. That was your only choice. Other than that, history, language, mathematics, physics, all set up for the whole year. And I think I got a good education. I mean, I was a reasonably best student. You know, I tried to skip school as much as I could. All right, but other than that, I think I notice now that I got a good education. Even though, so I think that's the main thing. Once you're educated and don't believe anybody tell you. I'm talking about on the face value. I don't believe. I mean, I listen to you. I'm not talking about in this way, but I generally listen to everybody. I basically hear everybody, but I discard most of it because most of it are crap. I evaluate, and as I said, I don't believe anybody at face value. Just I trust my doctor 100% because I'm with him 25 years now, and so far he's only done me good. So I trust him 100%. But he is the very few. Of course, I trusted my mother, and a couple of friends. I don't have many friends, but I have very long time friends, and very good friends. So that's basically, and I got basically all the help I need. I got it. I mean, neatness was never been I mean, I always tried to be very clean, but neatness, is it this way or this way, I don't care. Because I know a lot of people that this gotta be like this. No. And right now, I only care about my comfort. I mean, I have no choice. And I realize that, and I'm not unhappy. I'm not happy, but I'm not unhappy, and I think of dying at least 15 seconds a month, whether I need it or not. That's not one of, I know I'm going to die, but I don't make an issue out of it. I don't make any issue out of it. It comes when it comes. Up till then, I do what I feel like doing, as long as I can do it. That's it. And thank God, as I said, all my life, I was extremely lucky. I mean, luck started, as I said, before I was born, but also living in Budapest. It was lucky because the whole country and all Poland, it's like, and also when I got in the U.S. Army, I got in the U.S. Army just the right time. It was between Korea and Vietnam. I remember before I got discharged, they were looking for volunteers for Southeast Asia, not for Vietnam, Southeast Asia, but they were looking for volunteers. So I said, no way. No, thank you. I'm going to go home. So, no, again, here it says lucky. I really believe it. My luck was with me, and looking back at my life, I think I maybe completed 25-30% that I was capable of, but I'm not unhappy about it. I'm not okay. I believe that anything. I played a lot of tennis when I was younger, and a lot of table tennis, and I I didn't believe, okay, my major thing wasn't winning, just doing the right thing. And if you do the right thing, you're going to win. For me, it's turned around because I want to win, I want to win. Yeah, do I want to win? Yes. But I want to win the right way, and I enjoyed it. So, as I said, I got a pretty good life.
That's great.
Yeah,
Thank you, Tibor, for your interview.
thank you very much. And I see you May 22nd.
Yeah.
So,
So who do we see in this picture?
this is my mother's mother, Shahba Renee. She was born in 1875. And she passed away in 1951.
Can you tell us her full name?
Her full name was Charolta. I told you. Black Charolta.
Thank you. Okay. Who do we see in this picture?
And that's my father, Moore Hauerstock. He was born in 1906, February 6, 1906. And he passed away May 10, 57.
Thank you. Who do we see in this picture?
That's me about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. That's before the Holocaust. And my mother.
Thank you. Who do we see in this picture?
You see, my mother is sitting, and it's the office of the Canadian Red Cross in Vienna. And the ladies working with her, I presume, I don't know.
Thank you. Who do we see in this picture?
And this picture is my mother and my father's youngest brother. It's in his son's house in Montreal.
Do you know when it was taken, more or less?
It had to be, I would say, he passed away in 1992, so I would say 1989 or something.
Thank you.